Now, let's start with the first black pill today. So, apparently, wokeness is getting global, is going global. Now, like every other country in the world, Mexico has a long list of problems. But it has decided, or at least some officials of its high court have decided to import a further problem to it, wokeness. Now, prominent politicians have made gender critical remarks that have been interpreted as political violence. And this is not just a criticism that you would see from a generic leftist position. They have been actually sanctioned and they have been made public examples out of it.
Well, for making gender critical remarks.
Yes.
This is while they have the cartels in Mexico.
Well, there are priorities of problems, apparently, and people give their distinctive answers as to what
people
they consider.
Being murdered on the internet in various creative and brutal manners is here, but, you know, you said a no-no, so that's up here.
I interrupt this segment to bring you an important message about this stuff, the dollar. Not going so well, is it? Inflation is out of control and debt is even more out of control. In fact, the US government is on the verge of spending $1 trillion a year just servicing its debt. It spends about $6.6 trillion and it only collects about $4.6 trillion in revenues. So you can see that this situation is rapidly taking a turn for the worse. You might want to consider some gold and silver. And that is why that we've done a partnership deal with Goldco and we've created LotusEatersGold.com. Go and check that out. It's an offer for our American viewers. You can transfer a proportion of your IRA into this, and if you do so, you're going to get some of this lovely stuff, some bonus silver thrown in on top, up to $10,000. Or you can even take delivery of the physical gold to your home address if you prefer. So if you want money that goes clang when you put it down, check out LotusEatersGold.com.
As we said, there are hierarchies of problems and hierarchies of values by which we examine problems, and people give their distinctive answers. Now, but what is key here is that some gender critical remarks have been interpreted as political violence. Now, speaking of ridiculous linguistic tricks, visit our website. For £5 a month, you can have access to all our content and subscribe and watch basically everything. We have really lovely series, and you can actually watch Conceptual Psyops, the linguistic subversion of wokeness, which is symposium number 28 I did with Josh and Bo, and we examine the mechanics of language use and how the language of wokeness is basically a totalitarian attempt to destroy our minds, prevent people from thinking, and be able to criticize the establishment. And by all means, watch it. It's a great discussion. Now, back to our topic. Yep. Now, according to officials of the Mexican High Court, gender critical remarks constitute political violence. Now, we will talk about two people who have been charged. This is Rodrigo Ivan Cortés and Gabriel Quadri. Now, both have been associated with, let's say, center-right parties. Excuse me, please. Yep. Okay. Now, if we go on the next link, we will see in Britannica here, the National Action Party is basically a conservative Mexican political party with close ties to the Roman Catholic Church. It generally supports minimal government intervention in the economy. So I may be wrong, but it seems to me to be something like center-right, a party with, you could say, conservative social values, right-wing social values, and it's a bit economically liberal. So something like that. Now, let's go and check our first case, which is the case of Rodrigo Ivan Cortés. Rodrigo Ivan Cortés is a former member of the Mexican Congress and leader of political advocacy organization National Front for the Family, or FNF. Beginning in September 2022, the FNF expressed concern on Twitter that a bill presented by Salma Luevano, a congressional representative who identifies as transgender, constituted a grave violation of rights of freedom of speech and religious freedom in Mexico. The bill aimed to penalize the propagation of Christian teaching on sexuality as a form of hate speech. It gathered significant attention when Luevano presented the bill wearing the vestments of a Catholic bishop. Luevano filed a complaint against Cortez, arguing that a series of 9 social media posts on Twitter and Facebook constituted a violation of the right to be acknowledged as a woman and a denial of identity. Mexico's specialized regional chamber of the Electoral Tribunal of the Federal Judicial Power found that the posts constituted gender-based political violence as well as digital, symbolic, psychological, and sexual violence against Luevano.
There's very little I can do to comment on this other than laugh, because one, I often hear from Americans who are trying to, shall we say, excuse demographic change that's going on in America from, migration, legal or illegal, from down south of the border, coming up north to the USA, about how, don't worry, it'll all work out in the end because all of these people migrating over are actually really culturally conservative. Therefore, we'll just get more Republican voters. My point being that, well, whether I don't care the quality of the people that I'm being replaced by, I wouldn't want to be replaced in the first place. Also, it seems to suggest that the same problems that America is facing right now are also being faced by Mexico, suggesting, as always, that sadly, as much as I would like it to be the other way around, it is not necessarily the will of the people that guides these things. It's the will of those in charge, your representatives. And it's just amusing. Beyond that, when it comes to transgender issues, Neil Mohan prevents me from saying any more.
Okay, but what is interesting is the kinds of violence that have been associated with remarks such as that, because they were accused of political violence, digital violence, symbolic violence, psychological and sexual violence against Luevano.
For a single comment.
For some comments.
For some comments, supposedly he mentally raped her.
Yeah, but what is symbolic violence? That is one issue. And the issue to be judged is why is it symbolic violence? Why? Why is it not symbolic violence to dress up like a Catholic bishop to make fun of the Catholic Church while saying that Christianity is spreading across hate speech? Why is that not symbolic violence?
Well, it's pretty simple to me. It's because of the fact that the people who have the cudgel of the law say it isn't, whereas with this, they say it is. Symbolic violence, all of these are just nonsense terms made up so that they can have something to point to explain why it is that you need to be punished now.
Exactly. And I think that this confirms a hypothesis I have about the woke movement. It seems to me basically that it is just a shameless divide and conquer against the people.
Yes.
So we have all sorts of groups that are called protected groups, and someone protects them. Those people who protect them are not necessarily members of these groups, but they grant them the power. So if anyone told you about if I heard something like that, I would thought that a person would be making fun of me. If I heard it, if I didn't see, actual documentation for it, I would think that, this doesn't happen. This is just hearsay and it's completely wrong.
For the people who are the beneficiaries of this kind of action, I doubt that the terms used to excuse away why they get to be in charge and you don't really matter all of that much to them, because deep down at the base of it, they know that it gives them what they want.
As you see that it is used blatantly, shamelessly as a form of political assassination. Now, let's continue. It says, the chamber held that criticizing a transgender woman constitutes, open quote, undermining the political and electoral rights of women and the unencumbered exercise of their public office, close quote. Now, this basically implies that there are people who run for office who are exempt from criticism. How does it not follow?
I mean, I agree with you there.
And we know the kind of, ideologies that are involved into it, where they are so all-encompassing and they try to interpret everything as a sort of oppression or through the eye of oppression and intersectionalism, and basically any form of criticism, even if you talk about economic policies or, social policies about stuff that have nothing to do with this issue, everything will boil down to this, rhetorically speaking. The other person will be able to, let's say, tell you that, well, listen, everything you're criticizing me because I actually see that you hate me for who I am. So this is a way in which criticism is being completely destroyed. And I repeat this, the chamber held that, and these people are supposed to be representing justice, the chamber held that criticizing a transgender woman constitutes, open quotes, undermining the political and electoral rights of women and the unencumbered exercise of their public office, close quote. Essentially, this means you have no freedom to criticize the government, which means that the government will not allow you to criticize it. And this shows the use of playing identity politics, because let's say that you want to exercise political influence and political power within a country, and you don't want people to criticize you. It's useful, seen through that perspective, to have people who will be able to play these cards and say that, for instance, no, every criticism of mine is a criticism of my identity. You are denying me my identity.
Well, it must be fun to make it so that people criticizing you is literally illegal.
Yeah. So let's continue. Loevano, together with transgender identifying representative Maria Clemente, has gained notoriety for fomenting unrest within Mexico's Congress, including an incident where Clemente, supported by Loevano, physically wrestled with the president of the chamber to force him into relinquishing control of a congressional meeting in an attempt to force the expulsion of another lawmaker.
They break the masks out.
Clemente also prompted international outrage by tweeting explicit videos of Clemente's own sex work, citing a right to freely share this kind of content on digital platforms. Both of them come from a party called Morena that, if I'm not wrong, it's the ruling party of Mexico since 2018. And it's, you could say, it's basically, it pronounces to be left-wing. It says basically it's anti-neoliberal, everything you would expect, basically.
Sorry, so I know people have often made the comparison and joked that politicians are like prostitutes, especially in the US when you've got these gigantic lobbying groups, and anywhere really in the West where big financial and moneyed powers can basically buy whoever they want if they're in office. But you shouldn't actually be a prostitute as well, or have a history of that, or a history in pornography. That's absolutely ridiculous. If you're getting to the point where you're literally being ruled by hedonistic degenerates with a history of explicit pornography, then you've just got to flush the toilet, man. It's all going down the drain.
Let's watch the next link by Rebel News. It says here, I'm trying to find out what I'm allowed to say for YT. Now, Rodrigo Ivan Cortes described a transgender legislator, Salma Loevano, as a man who self-ascribes as a woman, after Loevano proposed a bill which regard Christian views on sexuality as hate speech. Now, you see here, this is Cortes on the left, and this is Loevano on the right. Now, Loevano has dressed as a Catholic bishop in order to
make a mockery of it.
To make a mockery of Christianity and say basically that the Roman Catholic Church is spreading hatred. And we see here, it says legislation brought forward by Representative Salma Loevano, a trans-identifying member of the Progressive Morena Party in Congress, threatened to deem Christian teaching on sexuality as a form of hate speech.
So the Roman Catholic Church in Mexico can soon expect to have pride flags adorning all of them, just like we have over here for the Church of England. So look forward to that, Mexibros.
Loevano announced the bill while dressed as a popess, Bibliatodo reported. You see this here. Now,
sure, to be fair, at this point, I'm sure the actual Pope would be all in favor of all of this, given some of the statements he tends to make.
I have no idea. I wish that is not true, but I have no idea.
From what I've heard of the current Pope, it's not looking good.
Enough of speeches against our rights, Loevano said, the outlet noted. The bill would deem any act conflicting with an individual's gender identity as an infraction, the report added. In response to the legislation, FNF expressed concern on social media in a series of posts beginning in September 2022, which included a remark describing Loevano as a man who self-ascribes as a woman. Loevano then filed a complaint against Cortes, arguing 9 posts on Twitter and Facebook were a violation of the right to be acknowledged as a woman, constituting a denial of identity. Former Congressman Cortes was charged for committing gender-based political violence. let's go on the next link and you will see where this led. Now it says on Wednesday, 9th of August, Mexico's highest court for electoral issues, the Superior Chamber of the Electoral Tribunal, upheld the lower court's guilty verdict convicting Cortez of gender-based political violence, digital violence, symbolic violence, psychological violence, and sexual violence for his social media expression. The Superior Chamber imposed a fine of 19,244 Mexican dollars, in addition to directing him to publish the court ruling and an apology drafted by the court on Twitter and Facebook daily for 30 days. Cortez also must take a course on gender-based political violence and register on the National Registry of Persons sanctioned in political matters against women.
There is a registry for that.
Yeah. What? And there are courses. So apparently this has been going quite a while. But,
Mexico's a joke country. I'm sorry to break this to you.
Wokeness has been a cultural import of Mexico, sadly, to say this sadly. Now let's watch the next video on GB News.
Now, last Wednesday, Mexico's highest court for electoral issues upheld the lower court's guilty verdict. Cortez must pay a fine and publish the court ruling and an apology drafted by the court on Twitter and Facebook daily for 30 days. So to discuss this, I'm joined by lawyer Germán Saucedo and writer Laura Lecuona. Thank you both for joining me very much. Germán, I'm going to come to you first about this. This is a very scary case when it comes to the idea of freedom of speech. And I think a lot of people assume that Mexico hasn't been infected by the culture wars in the way that we have over here. Are we wrong?
Oh, yes. We can see right now.
We are very, very infected by them.
Sorry, I can come to either first, but Germán, can I come to you first?
Yeah, sure. As we can see, this case is radical, not only in that it punishes free speech, it makes compelled speech part of the punishment. And we can see that this global ideological infection is not only part of the United States and of Britain, it's also part of Mexico and many other countries. So people tend to think of Mexico and other Latin American countries, or maybe some Asian countries, as exempt from this ideological virus. But that's not true at all. The culture war is raging not only in the United States and Great Britain and in Europe, it's raging in the entire world. It has consequences around the entire world. So, as we can see, it's gonna trickle down to the rest of the world.
There's an interesting point to be made here on the fact that this is a foreign import. The same way that a lot of the woke ideology is a foreign import over to the UK as well, which is that oftentimes people refer to America at the moment as the global American empire. And they're one of the only empires that you can reasonably say in the world refuses to acknowledge itself as being an empire. And I finished reading a book last night that we got early because the author of it, a particular Welsh rug merchant, sent a load of copies to us early, which we really, really do appreciate. And in that, it's discussing the idea of cyclical history. And as part of that, you get the idea that you have particular groups who break out and form an empire or emerge at the end of an empire, who have a particular way of life, a particular religion, a particular view of the world, that then later on, when the empire emerges more globally and takes on more territory, becomes more universalist. And you could say that with America, this kind of civil rights religion that has morphed into the woke semi-religion, if you want to refer to it that way, that we experience right now, did start out as something that was uniquely American, that related to American history and put things in a very American perspective as a route to power for the elites who are in charge at the moment, a way for them to consolidate power. But it has been exported to the rest of the world as this more universalized religion, which is why it just makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense. Why would Mexicans need to involve themselves in this kind of gender-based politics, which was never existed? Even 5 years ago, if I'd heard this sort of thing coming from Mexico, I'd have, said balderdash to that entire idea. The problem is that opposed to something like Christianity, which is a very universalist religion and is very useful for trying to unite people and unite different people's spirits from different background and such, woke is the worst universal religion that I have ever seen, that anybody has ever imposed upon anybody, because without trying to overstep YouTube terms of service, it so clearly goes against the history of all of the nations that it's trying to be imposed on, and also just against biological reality. And I'm not saying anything in particular there, but it goes against people's own expressed empirical experience of reality. That it's just terrible and creates these massive divisions in ways that other universalizing religions or belief systems, if you'd rather I use that term, have not in previous empires. It's just rubbish. It's absolute rubbish.
I haven't read the book, but it stands to reason, let's say, or at least to anyone who has read at least some history, that wherever you have a, say, superpower, power, empire, call it what you want, you have the attempt to dominate.
Yes.
The peoples under whose sphere of influence, and who are under your sphere of influence. So I think that wokeness is a form of cultural domination, because it does actually, if you see, it spreads across the world, and I don't think it's universalistic, because it's very divisive. It's not a message.
That's why I'm saying it attempts to be universalistic in the way that they try and export it elsewhere in the world, but it's also so particular that it's rubbish.
But you see,
rubbish at uniting.
It's always that some groups need to have protected rights and all this. And
as a formulation of political science and political tactics, it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible.
I mean, terrible from an instrumental perspective. It's not terrible. It works, and that's a problem with it.
Well, no, it doesn't actually create unity in the peoples, and it doesn't bond peoples together. It only works because of the top-down legal powers.
It works insofar as the goal is a bad one. It's to divide people.
Yes,
and to exert cultural dominance and domination on each of these countries. Right, let's go and proceed, because we will see that, sadly, this is not the only case. It's not an isolated incident. As we said, there is case. This is Gabriel Quadri. This was Gabriel Quadri's apologies after calling Salma Luevano sir. Now, if you see, this is a case where, we have another politician who has basically two sources of conflict with Salma Luevano. One is that on March 31st, the deputy for National Action Party, Gabriel Quadri, was the subject of severe criticism due to his transphobic comment before the Chamber of Deputies. Since during the session, the deputy called Salma Luevano as sir, despite the fact that she identifies as a woman, which was condemned by different members of political parties positioned on both sides of the spectrum, mainly the National Regeneration Movement, Morena, the institutional party, PRI, and the PAN itself. That's the first one. Later, he asked for an apology. He said it was an excess and a mistake, so from today on, I'm going to refer to her as a woman and as a deputy. He also said that he had already asked for an apology following the expressions of rejection by various members of the House. Now, this is one case. And if we go to the next one here, we will see another case, because what has happened is that from what I checked, since 2019 or somewhere there, the end of the previous decade, there is a law in Mexico that says that there should be 50% split between men and women within the Mexican parliament. So it's half men, half women. And Gabriel,
I believe there's an Aristophanes.
Gabriel Quadri.
Goes a bit further than that.
Gabriel Quadri protested with that and said that, some people here are not what they say they are, and this violates the law, and he was prosecuted. Now let's see here. The highest electoral court in Mexico ruled that statements made by Quadri on Twitter about the situation are discriminatory and ordered him to delete his tweets, issue a compelled public apology, and be registered as a gender-based political violator, censorship measures that clearly infringe on his civil and political rights as a Mexican citizen and breach his international human right to free speech. But if you see here, is that for standing up for women's opportunities, he could lose the right to run for office again. So if you are registered on that registry, you risk losing your right to seek office in the future.
And that register is just literally a register of official wrongthing.
Exactly. So if wokeness is entirely what we are saying it is, and it is a tool that those who are in power use in order to exert dominance upon those who are ruled, what's to stop them from saying basically that anyone who disagrees with you is a political violator and loses a right to run for office? That's just a question. So the problem is that, this is getting global, and unless we counter wokeness, this is going to escalate, and there are going to be new stages on the culture war, and this must be addressed.
Thanks for watching this segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you feel like supporting the work that we do here, then you can visit our merch store at merch.lotuseaters.com, where you can buy a mug, a hoodie, or any of the other products that we offer. If you're interested in catching up with everything that we're up to on a day-to-day basis, you can also follow our social media at Twitter at lotuseaters_com and also on Getter at the same @. Thank you and goodbye.